Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Today is a working day. I've got a subject I want to talk about, which is a viewer said I should go and watch a certain video, and as I didn't have a huge amount of comments this morning, I had the time to do it. It's a very long video and there's sections of it that are but nonetheless, even those bits, you can see the point that's being made. So I'm going to talk about that and leave you to your own devices to go and watch it if you choose to do so, or not if you choose to do so. For many, it would be a bit too scientific, but in between the sciencey bits is the good stuff, which anybody should be capable of working out. It's those snippets in between the sciencey stuff that's important. And unfortunately the video is very long and those bits are relatively short. But as I said, it's a working one today. I've got to water everything in here for two reasons. It's going to be hot, and one of the reasons will come from the chat. So I'm getting the big sprayer out and everything's going to get it today. You notice the camera's in a different place. I've got my short tripod out because I want the camera as far back in that corner as I can, so that wherever I am, I'm still in the camera. And that's the only place the camera can be where that works. Right, now there's a bit of RO water left in the sprayer from yesterday. Unfortunately with this weather I'm getting through my water quite quickly, but in doing so I'm sort of semi-saving water as well. I know that sounds daft, but the water's going in the sprayer whereas it used to go in the hydrofogger. But by using the sprayer, I'm naturally keeping the humidity up far higher than the setting on the hydrofogger, so the hydrofogger's virtually become redundant at the moment. Seriously, it really isn't kicking on at all. Right, that's as much as it's supposed to have. Right, so as I said, this is a working one. Right, the subject matter is circling around feeding our orchids, but not actually. You'll get it in a minute. So this guy's, oh, hang on, I've got to make a noise first. It don't work unless you pump it up. Right, first of all, as far as feeding orchids is concerned, a lot of us will return to and have relied on what Rick L told us. And yes, boy was he on the right track. So I've got no problems with that. But, there is a but, I'm afraid, that may not have been obvious to a lot of people. He often referred to the fact that he'd been growing hydroponically for many, many, many years. What he never specifically said was growing what. And I'm relatively safe in saying what he was growing was one of the most vigorous plants on the planet. They say in a room full of it, if you sit still you can hear it growing. What would a plant need to be able to do that? Feed. Yeah? So that's where he was coming from, and he applied it to his orchids very well and told us all about it. He did make one mistake, but that's a long time ago. Right, so this I'm just going to water as I talk, so I will have my back to you a fair bit of the time. Tough. That's how it's got to be. I need to get everything in here wet. It's got to be watered. Right, so this video I watched today is based on studies in the real world. Now, I like this sort of stuff rather than in the laboratory. A lot of the work was done in the laboratory, but the studying was done in the real world. So out in the field. So what are we talking about then? We're talking about species, aren't we? Now, unfortunately, within the orchid world, there are a lot of hybrids. And in amongst those, some have come out the other end of that process, vigorous plants. That's not natural. Yeah, so there's a little bit of an exception. And you would have to make exceptions for plants like that. So let's get back to, we've got species. Species growing on trees in tropical forests and the like. So this is where we're coming from. And the studies were based on the water. So what's in the water then? That's what it really comes down to. It comes down out the sky, and in areas like that, it's pretty clean water. It hasn't got all the pollution and everything that we get when you're talking about coming down out of the sky in industrial areas. So it's good stuff. But what else is in it? And the study showed that what else is in it is seriously next to nothing. And in these tropical rainforests, where I've often said, possibly mistakenly, sorry, there was a bing bong noise then. I hope it wasn't my doorbell. It should have been louder than that if it was. On a Sunday, highly unlikely. Yes, so basically there's next to nothing in that water. So that was point number one. And the whole talk, it was a talk, a presentation, rather than the sort of stuff we do. And it was given to a receptive audience as well, so a knowledgeable audience. So we've got the fact that there's not much in it, but that's not really the point. Saying there's not much in it is one thing, but then it got on to the more sciencey stuff, actually analysing what's in it. That's the bing bong, it's the church bells, so it must be a specific time of day. Yeah, 9:30, it's the church bells, it's Sunday, isn't it? Right, so it's not my doorbell at all. It went on to analyse what was in it and categorised it into, what comes out the sky and hits the tops of the trees, what there would be halfway down that tree, having run over some decay, monkey poo, bird poo, all that sort of stuff. So the water's on its way down, and then what's in it when it gets to the ground at that level, having run down all through the leaves and washed down the bark and all that sort of stuff. And one thing that became very apparent very quickly was the lack of nutrients. That was point number one. Point number two was the explicit lack of one of the nutrients, and it was one of the main ones. We've got our NPK, our biggies, and then we've got our magnesium and our calcium, the next one's down, and then the micro elements. Now in this water, in these forests, there was a distinct lack of K. The potassium wasn't there. It was incredibly low, almost non-existent. And that was natural. That was the real world. That was what was happening. And, surprisingly, there was quite a bit more nitrogen nitrate in there than was expected. So we're now looking at a feed naturally given to species out in these forests with a high nitrogen content and next to no potassium. So then the guy questions, how on earth can those plants grow? Potassium is an absolute essential. It practically makes everything in the plant work. It's really important. And yet, these plants were getting next to none of it, so how were they surviving? And he purports and proposes that, firstly, we have to understand how long our orchids have been on this planet. And they are some of the oldest plants. They've had a long time to evolve. So he quite knowledgeably puts across the fact that they found a way round it. And the way they found to get round it is that the processes that the potassium actually produces within the plants, they found other ways to do it. And it is very scientific in the presentation, but as far as the analysis is concerned, it really is as simple as that. Out there, they don't get much potassium. Therefore, they shouldn't be able to grow. They shouldn't be able to function. All of the things going on, water moving around, transfer between cells, all this sort of stuff. This is what the potassium actually does. It's really important stuff. And it's not really there. So, then we get to the point that we, in our innocence, like to feed our orchids because we like to see them grow. And we know that plants, don't forget we're talking orchids, I've now reverted to the word plants because these are generalisations now. Plants need all three of those macronutrients to do well. And most ordinary plants, which orchids aren't, do quite well if all three of those are quite nicely balanced. That's just how things work, generally speaking. So what would happen with ordinary plants if we drop the potassium right down? Well, they wouldn't grow very well. It's as simple as that. They just wouldn't grow very well. Right, now we get on to the bit that gets a little bit complicated, but I can keep it simple. If we use our normal fertilisers, and orchids don't need much potassium because they have mechanisms within them to replicate what is needed, and we use a normal feed, what are we actually doing in practice? What are we really doing to the plants? And it doesn't take much to think that through, does it? They found a way round absorbing potassium, and we give them potassium. So what have they got now then? You could say, well, they got more than enough then, haven't they? No, it doesn't work like this. And this is the bit that came out of that talk that really went in there and sunk in. Because they have found a way round the potassium issue, they've evolved to grab every bit of available potassium that comes their way. So this is the bit that is in the water that comes down out of the sky and runs down the trees. There is some there, and they've evolved to grab that and store it. And they keep doing it as long as it's offered. So as long as the potassium is there, they will grab it because there's so little around, they need every bit they can get. Now what are we doing? We're effectively giving them more. Well, you think, well, that's all right. Everybody says orchids will, you can't really overfeed them, they'll just take what they want. With all the other elements, that's true, but not with potassium, because they've evolved that need and that ability to grab every bit. They just keep taking it in and taking it in. So now what have we got then? Now what we've got is too much within the plant. It's inside the plant. And what happens if you get a potassium excess? It stops lots of the other things working properly. It stops calcium and magnesium working very well for a start. It stops nitrogen working the way it should. So what we've done now is we've stopped the plant growing properly. Now this doesn't happen overnight. So when you get a plant that appears to be doing well for an amount of time, but slowly but surely is going downhill, you may have found the answer. When there was no logic, the other plants are doing okay. Why is that one going downhill? Yeah? And they have found the answer. And the answer is, it's because we keep feeding them. And he uses a nice analogy. I'm not saying this analogy is correct, and it's a bit, what would you call it? It's not racist, I suppose it's sexist. But he basically uses the Italian or Jewish mother analogy, where their whole attitude to, if it's not very good, the answer is to feed it more, applied to sons and daughters, which I found amusing, I must admit. So the answer is, you know, if something's not quite right, one needs more food then. That's their whole philosophy on life, apparently. I wouldn't know. Right, so now we get back to what's in my sprayer. And what's in my sprayer is water. And probably for the foreseeable future, or at least the very near future, that's all that's going to be in my sprayer, is water. Why? Because I want these pots cleared out so that I can start afresh with what I believe is a reasonably sound theory. And I've always been willing to try new things and adopt different principles. I mean, when I first listened to Rick, I changed the way I fed my orchids there and then because it sounded good stuff. And I've basically stuck with that ever since to one degree or another. So he looked at media, this guy, as well, and he said, he actually used the term orchiata bark. And what he said about orchiata bark was, it stores virtually no nutrients. And then he had a go at the coir, and he said that stores an awful lot. And it seems particularly good at storing potassium because of the way the molecules work. As I said, you can listen to all this yourself and make your own minds up. So we've now got different types of media having an effect. Yeah? I wouldn't have even given that a thought. So I've come to not a conclusion, but a worth a try, that I'm going to wash my pots clean and make sure there are no stored nutrients in here. And, oh no. That's right, it's one of my Miltoniopsis species is not at all happy. Well, we may be discussing the very reason. We may be discussing exactly why it's not doing very well. Anyway, have I missed anything so far because I'm chatting? No. Right, so how do I, with what I've got, greatly reduce the amount of potassium in my feed? The answer is I can't with what I've got. So do I need to go out and get something else? No. So how am I going to do it then? Well, how I'm going to do it is, the first thing I'm going to do is greatly reduce my feed levels and my frequency. Now there may be some rather vigorous hybrids that might not be so happy, but there are a large portion of species and primary crosses in here, and to a degree they're more important to me. It's not so easy to get hold of in a lot of cases. Yeah, so that's the first job, is greatly reduce the feed. So now I've reduced the feed down to such a level that the amount of potassium going into the plant is low. But then so is everything else. Is that good? No, because I'm still using a balanced feed. So the percentage of the goldfinches have just come down. The percentage of the potassium is still high relative to the other elements. So I haven't achieved my goal. So if you remember what I've said about a pot, if you want to turn a deep pot into a shallow pot, plant the orchid low yeah, and put some cropping in the bottom. So instead of your media now being 6 inches deep, it's only 3 inches deep. So you've turned a deep pot into a shallow pot. It's pretend, but it works. So that's what I'm going to have to do with my feed, to take part in this. So it's an experiment, really, changing feeding, you know. So what I'm going to do is reduce my feed level right down, hopefully low enough that the amount of potassium the plant gets, in addition to any that it's getting round itself, is not going to be an overdose. That means that my other elements should start working properly. And plants that don't seem to be doing so well or don't seem to be growing as fast, if you take my Hercoglossum up there, that has still got 0 new growths on it. The plant is going downhill. We don't like that at all. And it's difficult to say why, because nothing's changed. But what has changed is invisible, because it's inside the plant. So what's changed is the fact that the plant is slowly but surely storing too much potassium, which then stops some of the other elements working the way they should. One of those elements is nitrogen. Nitrogen makes stuff grow. Potassium makes everything work so that it can grow. Yeah? Calcium gives it its strength. Magnesium does all sorts of wonderful things that I'm still not even sure about. So you can see where I'm coming from here. I've got to get my plants back to the point where they haven't got an excess of potassium. And the only way I can do that is to reduce everything as a start point, and then hopefully over a period of time unknown, this is something that didn't come out in the talk, was how to get rid of all the potassium if you've been feeding normally, like all of us do. Didn't mention that, how to get rid of it. But I would suggest that slowly but surely the plant would use it up, because you've stopped adding anywhere near as much in as you used to. So even though it's capable of getting round low values of potassium, it still needs the equivalent, and it still needs some of the real thing. So now we're getting to the point where hopefully it's reducing in the pot. But we still want our plants to grow. It's the balance that needs to be adjusted. You know, I've always talked about balanced fertilisers. You know, well that's where you get NPK, the N and the K are roughly the same-ish, although that sounds like I've just contradicted that because I'm lowering the K down. The P doesn't need to be anywhere near as high. See, now that's a relatively new bit of information. That was found out as part of the MSU studies on feeding orchids. It was found that they're just not using it. When they cut the plants up and took them down to cellular level and everything, it wasn't there. They didn't need it. They weren't absorbing it. But that was the difference. In that case, they weren't absorbing it. Whereas with the potassium, they've evolved to grab every little bit going. And the effect is long term, not short term. So now perhaps I can understand why some of my plants appeared to be doing okay, but slowly but surely went downhill when nothing really changed. Well, nothing changed outside the plant that was visible, but it certainly was changing inside. And the levels of potassium were building up and up. Yeah? When they weren't required. The plants have evolved to find a way round it. And that's the bit that came out that stuck in my mind. As I said, you can take it or leave it. You can listen to it or not. It's entirely up to you. But when Rick first came on the scene, he was like a magnet, because it gave the information out in a simplistic way that everybody could understand, and it made sense. And that's probably the most important thing. It made sense. So I'm halfway to dealing with this problem already, because my plants aren't going to get any food for a while. None. And I'm aware that one of the things he discovered was that the coir works differently to things like Orchiata. Now I was phasing that out anyway, except under certain circumstances, so that's nothing new there. I was doing that anyway. But then we get to, how do I get round the problem that I need my potassium level to go right down relative to the others? Well, by reducing the feed level right down, I've reduced all of them. So what do I need to do now? Bump the others up separately. So the likes of CalMag come into their own, because CalMag has got calcium and magnesium and iron in it, and a little bit of nitrogen, not a lot. So that sort of gets that going again. That's not good enough, because that hasn't got enough nitrogen to put the nitrogen level back up to the amount the plants need to physically grow. So we use the calcium nitrate. That doubles both ways, because that bumps the calcium up and bumps the nitrogen up. And I might have to start using a bit of Epsom salts, because if I'm going to use the calcium nitrate to bump up the calcium and the nitrogen so that they are above the level they have been in the past, leaving the potassium behind, yeah, it's a relative thing, then I'm not giving the plants the magnesium to balance it out, so I might have to use Epsom salts to do that. Now, this is growing season talk now. There's going to come a time when we're not in the growing season and stuff stops growing or grows hardly at all. And at that time, when we get to that time, I will probably just stick to low levels of feed. And he purports that the expression that you will read in books frequently, and often you will find in places like gardening people that have decided to do a video or a works, a book or whatever, on orchids, because the garden centre they work in sells orchids. They don't grow them, they sell them. Yeah, it's a difference. So they've decided to put some information out about orchids. And they possibly read some books. And the expression that comes up frequently is feed weekly, weekly. The two different spellings, obviously. Week as in not very strong, and weekly as in, half a fortnight. Sounds like cue for a song. No, that was half a sixpence, wasn't it? So you see where I'm coming from. Now, you have to bear in mind, this guy's got a fair bit of scientific backup to this chat. We like that, or I like that, you might not. Unfortunately, within the presentation is a fair bit of that, which makes it complicated and in some places not very easy to understand. Let me say that again, not very easy to understand. Yes, there were bits of it that I didn't get. But then I sort of revisited the whole thing and I thought, actually those bits that I didn't really understand that well, I don't really need to. So I can get away with not knowing that in-depth level. So I'll put the link in the description. I'll say it as well, because some people have trouble getting descriptions. You would need to search YouTube for what do orchids eat? That's the title of the presentation. What do orchids eat? So search for that, and what you're looking for is a Bioleaf thumbnail. So basically green and black with the word Bioleaf on it. The guy's name is Rick. Well, there's nuthatches on the water bath. That's good, because it normally moves so quick you've got a job to see it. Relative of the woodpeckers. Yes, so if you wish to go and have a go at that, please do so. I'm going to follow it for a while, possibly for the rest of the growing season. Because I liked what I heard and the backup that went with the words. So I'm going to give that a go. His highest level of feed is at about 170 parts per million. That's what he said. But that is made up that is a total value. The ingredients that have gone in to make that are nothing like anything I use, because that potassium's been dropped right down. The nitrogen and other elements have been bumped up. And he implies that by using a normal type of fertiliser with a normal level of potassium for orchids, long term degrades the plant. Slowly but surely that potassium builds up in the plant until it becomes a problem. And the problem it generates is that the other nutrients stop working properly. And one of those is nitrogen. And also calcium. Yeah? So, maybe we found an issue that's been sat there staring us in the face for a long time. And this is the thing with the books. You see, this is new stuff. This is people working out in the field now, today, with the type of rain we get. Even that's changed. You know, pre-industrial age rain was clean all over the world. You know, it's not now. So this is new stuff coming in. The techniques in laboratories, you know, the ability to smash a plant down to cellular level and lower, and find out what's in it, where it is in the plant, where are the concentrations of these elements, are they in the leaves, are they in the canes, pseudobulbs, are they at the base where the roots join in. One bit I've missed out, which is actually quite important. Rainwater, let me just, I've finished getting the place soaking wet, so let me just shut this down. Yes. Going back to the rainwater coming out the sky. Generally speaking, rainwater comes out of the sky with a pH between 6.5 and neutral. So it's in that range, often around 6.7, 6.8. It varies. It can vary between the start of a rain shower and the end of a rain shower. It can be quite different if it's a thunderstorm. So, you know, this does vary, but around those figures. Part of the analysis actually found out that orchids have got another evolutionary process that's only recently been found. They like a pH of 5.8, and that goes back to Rick, doesn't it? So he had this, but I don't think he had it for the right reasons, or the backup of why orchids work this way and other plants don't. Yeah. So this comes back to the pH that the plant would like on the interface between the root and what's outside the root. Yeah, which in some cases is air, isn't it? You know, in some cases it's bark hanging onto a tree. In some cases it's moss or roots of other plants, okay? But it needs that interface at around 5.8 so that when it takes the stuff in, it can make it work immediately, because there isn't much of it. So it all needs to work. Can't have surplus because there isn't any, not out there. And how does it achieve this then? Does it have to sit and wait for the pH to change? No. It's now been discovered that from within the plant it can create acidity and it exudes it so that it can change the pH of what's outside the roots to get it where it wants it so that it can maximise what it takes in. They're clever stuff, these plants, aren't they? They do this all on their own. So that was the final thing. So in amongst his feed, yeah, he uses lemon juice or citric acid, something like that, to make sure his pH at the roots is where the plant needs it, so that the plant doesn't have to do it. Yeah? So all he's doing is saving the plant that work. While it's doing that work to balance the pH to where it wants it, it's using up resources within the plant to do that. So he tries to counteract that by making sure it's okay at first. Now don't forget what we've said before, we've still got to worry about what media we're in here. Yeah? If we've got old tired bark type media or coir type media or zombie moss or anything like that, that's going to be pretty acidic. And it could be too acidic. Yeah? Well, the plant can't do it the other way round because it's never had a need to. So if the media around the roots is too acidic, it can't raise the pH to get it where it wants it. So nothing works properly. So all we're doing is finding out stuff that's new. It's new information that we can choose to do something about, from nothing to everything. And all those bits in between, with the variables, the different types of media, different types of water even. Now, the reason the comment was left was in my last, I'll get there in a minute. They say I can actually talk about one thing and do something entirely different. Well, it does fall flat on its face sometimes because I can't. I can most of the time. It was this plant that was in the last Project Orchids video, and my worry about this. And if you look up the reasoning about leaf tips turning brown or yellow, we've just gone over that to one degree or another. Just here, on where this is my kikis, that they've stopped growing. They started to shoot out in the spring, now they've stopped. They've just stopped. Reason unknown, maybe. But where that is, what was there was my Dendrobium senile. What did that do? That went from the plant that produced the picture that moves around at the start of my video, at the intro. One of those is Dendrobium senile. It went from that to dead. And I still don't know why. Maybe I do. Anyway, you take that lot as you see it or not. I'll warn you now, if you're going to go away and watch that video, it's hard work. If you don't think it's hard work when you watch it, then great. But I suspect you will. And I suspect some people will start watching it and then give up and not finish watching it, which is also fair enough. But you get the choice. So, as I said, if you want to watch it, search YouTube for What Do Orchids Eat? And look for Bioleaf as the thumbnail, black with green writing, Bioleaf, and the guy who's doing the presentation. It's a Zoom presentation basically, so there's a picture of the guy and his slides, you know, as a presentation. So it's a PowerPoint presentation done via Zoom. Anyway, see what you think. You might end up watching all of it. You might have a very serious scientific basis that you're watching it with, and you might come out the other end and say, what a load of cobblers, talking out of his blah, 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 blah. Fair enough. All I'm doing is offering you the choice to go and see it or not, and when you go and see it, I offer you the choice to believe all of it, some of it, or none of it. But you're making those choices, not me. I've made my choices based on what I've just seen. I'm also going to watch it again this afternoon at a more leisurely pace because I want to get it watched so that I can do this and get this done before it gets hot out here, which is why I've done all that while I've been talking and not done the normal sort of thing. It's just coming up to 10 o'clock now. In 30 minutes time the sun will clear the tree and that's when it starts getting hot out here. At the moment out here it's a very pleasant 21 degrees. I like that. And I've managed to cool the lounge down to 21 degrees by having this door open since I got up this morning at daybreak. Silly o'clock we'll call it. But that's my normal, can't help that. So say what you think, but I am using the sprayer a lot because it's to take the pots down and water them, blah 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 blah, takes quite a bit of time and energy. And with the heat that we've got at the moment, the energy's a bit lacking, I'm afraid, and the time would take me into the hot bit. So I'm going to stick with the sprayer for a while, and I'm also going to stick with the fact that I am going to continuously not feed for a while. Bearing in mind the mounts are getting sprayed every day, otherwise they're too dry. So they will be flushed right through in a week. With a week of no feed, the moss, those that have got some, there won't be any nutrients left in there. They'll have been washed out. So the plant will be clamouring for nutrients, that even though it's at a very low level and they don't need much, they still need some. And in that clamouring, hopefully, this is the bit I didn't get from the video, it will use up any excess potassium that's within the plant, because it's an essential function for everything else to work. It's even important for what goes on with photosynthesis, you know, which is the taking energy from the sun and CO2 and water and actually converting that into sugars and things that the plant needs. It's even important for that. So it's going to use some. It'll use it in the photosynthesis thing. Because the other ingredients is I'm chucking water at it like it's going out of fashion, and it gets the CO2 out of the air, and it gets oxygen. Well, reverse process. So those are gases, it gets those. And the hydrogen, the H2O that it needs as well, comes from water. It gets everything it needs without anything else. And that can produce the sugars to sustain the plant. And hopefully it will use up some of that potassium to make that all work a bit better. So, yeah, a novelty. And I didn't know any of that when I started watching that video. I need to watch it again to get it to sink in and reanalyze as I watch it next time. And with the stop and think bit, hang on, don't just take it as read. What else can we look up here? Can we find any other information? Because this is just coming over as new stuff for me. So, right, now believe it or not, even though it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to go and get some breakfast because I've run out of milk, and the little shop, my little shop round the corner, doesn't open until 9 o'clock on a Sunday, so it's open now, and I don't want to walk round there any later in the day than now because of the heat. You know, it's only a 5-minute walk, but I don't want to get absolutely stewed going around there and coming back, so we'll get on and do that. And if you're not subscribed, please do so. It's Sunday, we have to do all that. Thanks to my patrons for hanging in there, great stuff. Thanks for all those that have wandered across to the Bonsai channel and subscribed over there to get those numbers up. They're doing okay, 700 and coming up to 750. Subscribers, which is 3/4 of what I need, and I've just clicked over 3,000 watch hours, which is 3/4 of what I need. I suspect these last quarters are going to take the longest, but every little bit helps, so all good stuff. And as far as this channel is concerned, this one's drifting along quite nicely. The subscriber numbers just slowly tick upwards. And I get views that I'm happy with most of the time, and it's all sort of working okay. And don't forget that I'm okay with you suggesting videos in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions. You might not get that video, but you certainly won't get it if you don't ask, unless I just come up with the idea naturally. Anyway, so that's today's food for thought. Or some will have glazed over and found that they were watching me work and not listening. Fair enough. You do what you will with that information and whether or not you go and watch the presentation. I'll see you next time. Oh, just to tell you, what you've got tomorrow is hippie soap. I've already filmed it. I did it yesterday. So the first go at using hippie soap this year was done yesterday and filmed and will be posted tomorrow. So it's hippie soap day tomorrow, which means I haven't got a film. I might be filming for the next day. Tomorrow's Monday, that's followed by Tuesday. We're expecting to head up towards 40 degrees C in this part of the UK tomorrow and Tuesday. That is going to be the sort of weather where you probably do as little as possible. So I can get out here early, chuck the water around, retire into the coolest place in the house, and I may well stay there and not venture upstairs to bed. Just stay down here where it stays coolest. We shall see. All good fun. I mean, I can sleep okay on the settee. It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm going to get cold not being cosy in bed. It's too hot. So we shall see. Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.